Most men who pursue wealth understand the summit, but misunderstand the nature of the ascent. The first man looks upward and sees a creditor. He believes the summit has a price, and that price is paid in the currency of self-destruction. Surrender your sleep first, then your ease, then the warmth of your relationships, then the quiet integrity of your health. Laying each one on an altar constructed from borrowed wisdom and inherited fear, he moves upward, and with every step he grows lighter. Not because he is ascending, but because he is being emptied. When he finally reaches the summit, there is no celebration waiting. There is only a man who has traded everything he climbed for the climb itself. Standing at the peak, hollowed, gazing at a view he no longer possesses the wholeness to receive. The second man begins the same ascent. He faces the same gradient, the same cold, the same distance. But something is fundamentally different in the nature of his movement. He is not paying a toll. He is not making an offering to a hostile mountain that demands blood before granting passage. He is expressing a capacity that was already present within him. And in doing so, the climb itself becomes a form of nourishment rather than expenditure. He does not arrive empty. He arrives more fully himself than when he began. Wallace Wattles teaches that these two men are not following different strategies. They are operating under entirely different laws of the universe. The world has canonized suffering. It has built an entire theology out of martyrdom and called it ambition, no pain, no gain. Sleep when you are dead. Pay the price. These phrases move through culture with the authority of axioms, repeated by the successful and the unsuccessful alike, accepted without examination because they carry the emotional weight of sacrifice. And sacrifice, the culture insists, is the proof of seriousness. The man who bleeds for his goal is the man who truly wants it. The man who does not bleed is suspect, soft, unworthy of the result. This is the doctrine. It sounds like wisdom. Wallace Wattles identifies it as a fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth is actually created, not a minor error in technique, but a root-level error in cosmology. The sacrifice doctrine rests on a hidden premise that the universe is hostile, that abundance is scarce, and that whatever a man wishes to possess must be wrestled away from a world that does not wish to release it. Under this premise, suffering becomes logical. If the world is reluctant, then force is required. If the supply is limited, then competition is necessary. If wealth is an extraction, then personal destruction is simply the cost of the extraction. This entire architecture of belief feels coherent from the inside, and it produces real suffering in the lives of real men. Suffering that is then pointed to as evidence of the doctrine's validity. The man grinds himself into ruin and says, "This is what it takes." He cannot see that the ruin itself is the proof of his misalignment, not of his virtue. Wallace Wattles dismantles this entirely, not with comfort, not with reassurance, but with a correction delivered at the level of first principles. The universe is not hostile. It is not a reluctant creditor awaiting a sufficient payment of human suffering before it releases its store of wealth. It is, in Wattles's precise language, a living, formless substance. Intelligent, creative, and driven by one fundamental impulse: to produce more life, more expression, more abundance through every channel that opens itself to that impulse. You do not fight it. You do not bleed for it. You align with it. And alignment, by its very nature, is not sacrifice. It is recognition. What you are about to receive is not inspiration. It is not a new framework layered over the same exhausted assumptions. What you are about to receive is the singular correction that Wallace Wattles spent his life arriving at. A correction so precise and so complete that once it is understood at the level of principle rather than the level of technique, the entire sacrifice doctrine becomes not merely wrong, but structurally impossible to maintain. We will dismantle it, piece by piece, from the foundation upward. We will not leave a single pillar of the martyrdom model standing, because it deserves no quarter. It has cost too much for too long to be handled gently. We will reveal the one truth from Wallace Wattles that makes effortless wealth not a fantasy projected by the naive, but the most logically coherent outcome available to any man who understands the actual laws governing the creation of abundance. This is not a promise made to flatter you. It is a statement of what the law produces when it is correctly understood and correctly applied. Wattles did not write for the dreamers. He wrote for the precise and the disciplined, for those capable of holding a principle and following it to its logical conclusion without flinching when that conclusion contradicts everything they were taught. And we will demonstrate, with the cold clarity that this teaching demands, precisely why the man who suffers most is so often the furthest from what he seeks. Not because suffering is punished by the universe, but because suffering is the outward signal of an inward misalignment, a broadcast on the wrong frequency, a force applied in the wrong direction, a current running against the very channel it is trying to fill. The man who is bleeding for his success is not almost there. He is almost nowhere, because he is working with a law he has never examined, against a force he has never understood. That ends here. Wallace Wattles opens The Science of Getting Rich with a claim that most readers encounter and immediately move past, treating it as poetic preamble rather than the literal and foundational statement of the entire system. He asserts that there exists one original substance from which all things are made, a formless substance that fills all of space, permeates every object, occupies every apparent vacuum, and constitutes the invisible ground from which all visible form has emerged and continues to emerge. This is not metaphor. Wattles does not deploy it as an image or a rhetorical device. He states it as the first law of the system, the axiom upon which every subsequent teaching depends. To rush past it is to build the entire structure of his method on a foundation you have never examined. What distinguishes this formless substance from the inert matter of conventional materialist thought is a quality that Wattles names with great deliberateness. It thinks. This substance is not passive. It is not the cold, indifferent material of a mechanistic universe operating by blind force. It is alive in the most essential sense of the word. Not biologically alive, but consciously alive, imbued with an intelligence that permeates its every aspect. This is a claim of staggering weight, and Wattles advances it without apology. He is not asking for your belief as a spiritual courtesy. He is presenting the operating premise of a precise and demonstrable science, and he invites you to test it by application rather than by prior conviction. From this foundational intelligence flows the impulse that drives all of creation. The formless substance is not neutral. It is not indifferent to expression. It is governed, if one can speak of it being governed, by a single and inexhaustible drive. The impulse toward more life, more expression, more fullness of being. This is the creative impulse at the root of all that exists. Every tree that pushes upward through stone, every organism that multiplies and expands its range, every human mind that reaches beyond its current boundary. All of this is the same formless substance expressing its fundamental nature through the particular forms it has taken. Creation is not something that happens to the universe. It is what the universe is. Consider what this means for the question of wealth. If the foundational substance of all things is alive, intelligent, and oriented toward more life and more expression, then wealth, as a form of expanded capacity, expanded reach, expanded ability to live fully, is not an anomaly in the universe. It is not something rare that must be torn from a reluctant world. It is an expression of the universe's own deepest nature. The formless substance does not need to be convinced to provide abundance any more than a river needs to be convinced to flow downhill. Abundance is the direction of its natural current. The only question is whether the channel through which you are asking it to flow is open or obstructed. This realization performs a fundamental reorganization of the entire problem of wealth creation. If abundance is the natural tendency of the creative intelligence of the universe, then poverty, in all its forms, is not the natural state. It is the result of a blockage, a misalignment, a condition in which the channel is not open to the current that is already pressing against it. The man who is poor is not being withheld from by a miserly universe. He is, in some precise and identifiable way, closed to a flow that has never stopped attempting to move through him. The problem is never on the side of the formless substance. The supply is without limit. The problem is always on the side of the receiving form. What does it mean, in practical terms, to be closed to this flow? Wattles is not vague on this point. The primary obstruction is thought that contradicts the nature of the formless substance itself. The formless substance is creative, expansive, and oriented toward more life. Thought that is competitive, fearful, contracted, or oriented toward lack operates in direct opposition to this nature. It does not slow the universe down. The universe is not diminished by a single man's confusion, but it closes the channel within that man. It creates, in the space between his inner state and the outer creative force, a resistance that no amount of physical labor can overcome. This is why the hardest working, most self-sacrificing men are often the furthest from abundance. They are generating force in the wrong direction. Here is the precise nature of the collaboration that Wattles describes. The formless substance responds to thought impressed upon it. This is not a spiritual wish. It is stated as a law, as reliable and as impersonal as the law that governs the behavior of a current in a conductor. When a man holds a clear, specific image of what he desires to create, holds it with faith rather than anxiety, and combines it with a genuine gratitude for what already is, he is not hoping the universe will cooperate. He is operating the mechanism by which the universe has always operated. He is doing precisely what the creative intelligence of all things was designed to respond to, and it responds not as a favor, but as a function of its own nature. This shifts the entire orientation of effort. A man who understands the nature of the formless substance does not approach wealth creation as a war of attrition. He does not ask how much he must endure before the universe relents. He asks, instead, a far more precise question. Is my inner state aligned with the creative intelligence that governs all form? Is the impression I am placing upon the formless substance the impression of faith, clarity, and gratitude? Or is it the impression of fear, confusion, and resentment? The former opens the channel. The latter closes it. No volume of external effort can substitute for this inner alignment, and no degree of inner alignment requires the destruction of the self as its prerequisite. The great teachers of every tradition have circled this truth from different angles. But Wattles approaches it as an engineer approaches a mechanism, with the intention of naming the parts, identifying their function, and providing precise instructions for their operation. He does not romanticize the formless substance. He does not surround it with mystical inaccessibility. He describes it as the substance of all things and explains its law with the directness of a man who has tested the principle and found it to be exactly as reliable as he states. The romanticism is yours to add or withhold as you choose. The law operates regardless of your aesthetic relationship to it. What, then, is the true nature of the formless substance's relationship to the individual man? It is not the relationship of a deity to a supplicant. It is not the relationship of a market to a consumer. It is the relationship of a universal creative principle to one of its own expressions. The man is not outside the formless substance, petitioning for entry. He is made of it. He is a particular form through which the same substance that thinks all thoughts and creates all things is attempting to express more of itself. When he aligns his thought with this creative impulse, he is not performing a trick. He is removing the obstruction between himself and what he already, at the deepest level, is. This is the foundational truth that makes the sacrifice doctrine not merely wrong, but incoherent. The sacrifice model presupposes that you are separate from the source of abundance, that the source is elsewhere, that it is reluctant, and that your suffering is the currency required to bridge the gap. Wattles' cosmology eliminates all three presuppositions in a single stroke. You are not separate from the source. The source is not reluctant, and suffering is not currency. It is noise. It is the sound of a channel in resistance. It is the cost of misalignment, not the price of creation. To sacrifice is to misunderstand the relationship between the form and the formless at the most fundamental level. Consider the implications for how a man spends his mental energy. Every hour devoted to anxiety about whether the result will come is an hour spent impressing the formless substance with doubt. Every act of self-destruction undertaken in the name of proving seriousness is a physical expression of an inner belief that the universe must be compelled rather than aligned with. Every resentment held toward those who have what you want is a sustained impression of lack upon the very substance that is waiting to fill that lack. The man of sacrifice is not merely suffering unnecessarily. He is actively, though unknowingly, using the very mechanism of creation against himself. He is precise in the wrong direction. The formless substance, Wattles is careful to note, does not judge these errors. It does not punish the man who impresses it with fear. It simply does what its nature requires. It produces, in form, the equivalent of what is impressed upon it. This is not cruelty. It is the law operating without prejudice. The same law that rewards the man of clear vision and genuine faith also returns to the man of anxious, self-defeating thought exactly what his thought is broadcasting. The universe is not conspiring against the one who suffers most. It is being faithfully and precisely accurate. It is showing him the exact content of his dominant inner state, rendered in the material of his outer life. And this is the most liberating truth the formless substance reveals. Because if the law is impersonal, then it is also correctable. The man who has been operating in misalignment is not condemned to remain there. The law does not remember his errors. It does not accumulate grievances or demand a period of atonement before it begins responding to a corrected signal. The moment the channel is cleared, the moment thought becomes aligned with a creative impulse, vision becomes clear, and gratitude becomes genuine. The law begins to operate in the new direction with the same faithfulness and precision it always has. The correction is not gradual. The law is always fully operative. What changes is the quality of what is being impressed upon it. Wattles makes a distinction that is both precise and radical, one that separates his system from every doctrine of effort that preceded it and every doctrine of effort that has followed. He does not argue against work. He does not construct a philosophy of idleness and dress it in the language of metaphysics. The distinction he draws is more surgical than that, and it operates at a level that most readers, accustomed to thinking in terms of effort and rest, have no immediate category for. The distinction is between labor and the use of mind, between the blind application of physical force and the deliberate use of thought as the primary creative instrument. To understand why this distinction is not merely semantic, one must examine what the world is full of. The world is full of labor. It has always been full of labor. Human history is an unbroken record of physical effort applied with relentless discipline. Fields plowed, ore extracted, goods transported, hours consumed in the service of production. And the world is also, with a consistency that defies all moral intuition about the justice of hard work, full of men who labor without ceasing and receive almost nothing in return. The laborer who breaks his back in the field for 40 years does not accumulate the wealth of the man who sits at a desk and thinks for 10. This is not unfair. It is the precise operation of a law that most men do not know exists. What creates wealth is not effort in the raw, undirected sense. What creates wealth is the right use of thought, wedded to purposeful action. The emphasis on both terms is necessary. Thought without action is a seed without soil. It carries the potential for form, but it has no medium through which to express. Action without thought is force without direction. Energy expended, friction generated, but no particular result produced beyond the expenditure itself. Wattles insists on both, and insists on their proper relationship. Thought is the primary, creative, formative force. Action is the means by which thought is given material expression in the physical world. One is the architect. The other is the builder. To confuse their roles is to build without a plan. When a man is aligned with the formless substance, when his dominant thought is the clear image of what he intends to create, held with faith and underwritten by genuine gratitude, something precise happens to the quality of his action. His actions carry what Wattles calls a creative force far beyond their physical weight. This is not mystical exaggeration. It is a description of what it looks and feels like from the inside when a man's effort is moving with the current of the creative intelligence rather than against it, or merely alongside it. The same physical act, performed by a man of clear vision and aligned thought, produces a fundamentally different result than the same act performed by a man in anxiety and confusion, not because the act is different, but because the force behind it is of a different order. Think of it in terms of two men rowing a boat. The first man rows with great ferocity against a current he has not bothered to examine. He is exhausted. He is making progress only by the most violent application of effort. And he would tell you, sincerely and accurately from his own experience, that advancement requires enormous sacrifice. The second man has taken the time to understand the waterway. He knows where the current runs. He positions himself within it and rows in the same direction it is already flowing. His effort is real. He is still rowing. But the current is multiplying the effect of every stroke. He is not less serious than the first man. He is more precise, and precision, in Wattles' system, is worth more than any quantity of misdirected force. This is the image of the effortless way. not the absence of effort, but the presence of alignment. Effort without alignment is the sacrifice model. Effort with alignment is the creative way. The distinction is not in the volume of energy expended, but in the relationship between that energy and the laws governing the domain in which it is applied. A man who does not know the law of the domain is always working harder than necessary. A man who knows it is never working against himself. He is not paying a toll. He is riding a current. And a man riding a current can cover in an hour the distance that would cost the man rowing against it a lifetime. Wattles is specific about what misuse of effort looks like, because it is important that the effortless way not be confused with comfort-seeking or the avoidance of difficulty. The man who avoids effort because he finds it unpleasant is not practicing the creative way. He is practicing the avoidance of life, which is the opposite of the creative impulse. The man who practices the creative way is often, as Wattles observes, working at a greater sustained intensity than those around him. But the nature of that intensity is entirely different. It is not the intensity of a man fighting the current. It is the intensity of a man fully expressing his capacity. The intensity of a craftsman absorbed in his craft, of a builder absorbed in his building. It replenishes rather than depletes. It advances rather than excavates. The sacrifice model, examined from this angle, reveals itself as nothing more than misdirected effort rationalized into virtue. The man who sacrifices has confused the volume of his effort with the quality of his alignment. He believes that suffering more will compensate for the absence of the inner condition that the law actually requires. He adds more labor to substitute for less thought. He works longer hours to avoid confronting the clarity his vision lacks. He grinds harder to avoid sitting still long enough to examine whether his dominant mental state is an impression of faith or an impression of fear. The sacrifice is not the price of success. It is the noise produced by a man who has not yet learned that the price of success is an inner condition, not an external toll. The law that Wattles describes has no moral preference for suffering. It does not respond to suffering as evidence of worthiness. It responds to the quality of what is impressed upon the formless substance, the clarity of the vision, the faith with which it is held, the gratitude that sustains the channel. A man who holds these three in alignment while expending moderate, directed effort will produce more than the man who exhausts himself in their absence. This is not a reward for the gentle. It is the impersonal function of a law that does not distinguish between the man who has bled for his goal and the man who has thought precisely for his goal. The law sees only the quality of the impression. What then is the practical meaning of using the mind rightly? Wattles is not describing daydreaming or passive visualization as a substitute for engagement with the world. The right use of mind is an active, disciplined, sustained practice. It is the deliberate maintenance of a specific mental state, the state in which the vision is clear. Faith is the governing attitude, and gratitude is the orientation toward what already exists. This state does not arise spontaneously in most men. It requires the same order of discipline that any genuine mastery requires. The difference is that this discipline is applied inwardly, to the governance of thought, rather than outwardly, to the multiplication of labor. It is more demanding than sacrifice, not less, because thought is harder to govern than a schedule. Here is the diagnostic question that this teaching places before any man who wishes to examine his own situation with genuine honesty. What are you impressing upon the formless substance with the greatest consistency and force? Not what you tell yourself you believe, not what you consciously affirm in moments of deliberate practice. What is the dominant quality of your thought across the full arc of your waking hours? Because the formless substance does not distinguish between your deliberate impressions and your habitual ones. It responds to the total weight of what you bring to it, moment by moment, as a constant broadcast. And most men, if they examine this honestly, find that their dominant broadcast is not faith, clarity, and gratitude. It is anxiety, confusion, and a sustained impression of lack. The effortless way, understood precisely, is not an alternative to effort. It is an alternative to the specific kind of effort that runs against the law. The effort that is born of doubt, sustained by fear, and oriented toward a universe imagined as hostile. That kind of effort is the most exhausting form of human activity because it generates friction at every level. In the body, in the mind, and in the relationship between the man and the creative intelligence he is unknowingly opposing. The effortless way replaces this friction with alignment, and when the friction is gone, what remains is still work, purposeful, directed, engaged. But it is work that does not hollow the man out. It is work in the direction of his own nature and the nature of the formless substance simultaneously. The reverse bridge must be crossed here with full deliberateness. The modern world has produced an epidemic of what it proudly names the hustle, a cultural glorification of self-destruction dressed in the language of ambition, in which the volume of sacrifice is treated as the primary metric of seriousness. Men compare their sleep deprivation as if it were a credential. They catalog their renunciations as evidence of commitment. The culture elevates this and calls it admirable. Wattles, writing at the turn of the 20th century, identified this exact pathology before it became the defining religion of an entire civilization. He named it, precisely, the confusion of labor for the use of mind. And he offered the correction not as a gentler philosophy, but as a more accurate science. The man who grinds himself to dust is not more committed than the man who aligns his thought. He is less precise, and imprecision in the domain of creation is always expensive. The effortless way is, in the final analysis, not a method for making success comfortable. It is a method for making success inevitable. When the inner condition is correct, when the vision is clear, the faith is unwavering, and the gratitude is genuine. And when that inner condition is married to purposeful, advancing action, the result is not a possibility or probability. It is the operation of a law. The formless substance does not fail to respond to the correct impression any more than gravity fails to respond to mass. The law is not occasionally operative. It is always operative. The only variable is whether the man standing before it understands what it requires, and whether he is willing to provide that, rather than the sacrifice that the doctrine demanded of him. James Allen, in the pages of As a Man Thinketh, establishes what may be the most foundational law in the literature of mind. The outer life of a man is not an accident. It is not the product of circumstance, of fortune, or of forces beyond his governance. It is the precise and faithful expression of his inner root system, the aggregate of his dominant thoughts, his established beliefs, and the quality of the mental soil from which all his actions naturally grow. The outer life cannot exceed the inner root. The fruit is always the evidence of the root. This is Allen's principle in its most elemental form, and it is a law so complete in its operation that it leaves no room for the sacrifice doctrine to stand. If the fruit is determined by the root, then no amount of force applied to the fruit, no sacrifice, no grinding, no self-destruction at the level of action will change the quality of the harvest. Wattles provides what Allen's principle requires, the practical science of root cultivation. Where Allen names the law, Wattles describes its mechanism and provides the precise means by which a man who understands the law can bring his root into deliberate alignment with the creative intelligence of the formless substance. The two teachings are not in competition, they are sequential. Allen provides the diagnosis, Wattles provides the protocol, and the protocol, understood in its fullness, confirms with complete precision what Allen's principle already asserts. No outer effort, however sustained, can substitute for the right inner condition. The root determines the fruit. The inner state determines the outer result. This is the law. When a man's root is aligned, when his dominant thought is one of abundance, his action is purposeful and advancing, and his gratitude is genuine and sustained. He is not forcing results into being through the application of will against a resistant world. He is growing results. The distinction between forcing and growing is not merely aesthetic. It describes two entirely different relationships between the man and the creative force he is working with. Forcing assumes resistance. It assumes that the desired result is elsewhere, that the universe is not cooperating, and that personal will must be applied with sufficient violence to overcome this reluctance. Growing assumes the opposite. It assumes that the desired result is already in process, that the creative intelligence is already moving in the direction of the vision, and that the man's role is to remain in the condition that allows this growth to proceed unobstructed. The sacrifice model, examined through the lens of Allen's root principle, reveals the precise nature of its error. When a man attempts to generate wealth through sheer outer force, through the escalation of labor, the surrender of well-being, and the sustained application of effort beyond the capacity of the organism to sustain it, he is treating the fruit as if it were the cause rather than the effect. He is trying to produce a different harvest by hammering the branches. But the harvest is not determined at the level of the branches. It is determined at the level of the root. And the root of the sacrifice model is, invariably, poisoned. It is fed by fear. The fear that abundance will not come without sufficient payment of suffering. It is fed by lack, the sustained inner experience of not enough, of insufficiency, of a gap that must be filled by force because faith is absent. The outer sacrifice is simply the physical expression of this root condition. When Allen observes that a man's outer life is the expression of his inner root system, he is not offering comfort to those whose roots are misaligned. He is offering a diagnosis of unyielding precision. The root is the cause. The outer life is the effect. To change the effect without changing the cause is not possible. It is not a question of difficulty or effort. It is a question of logical structure. Effects do not precede their causes. No volume of sacrifice at the level of the effect can alter the root that is producing it. This is not pessimism. It is the most empowering statement available to any man who has the capacity to govern his own thought. Because if the root is the cause, then the cause is within reach. The man who can change his root can change everything that grows from it. Wattles' application of this principle centers on a practice that is simultaneously simple in its description and demanding in its execution. The maintenance of the clear mental image of what one intends to create, held in a state of faith, without contamination by doubt or fear. This is root work. This is the deliberate cultivation of the inner soil from which all outer results will grow. It is not passive. It requires a quality of mental discipline that most men, accustomed to governing their schedules but not their thoughts, find genuinely difficult. But it is work of an entirely different order than sacrifice. It does not hollow the man out. It deepens him. It makes him more of what he fundamentally is, rather than less. And as the root deepens, the results that grow from it become not more forced, but more natural. The inevitable expression of an aligned inner state, meeting a creative universe that was always ready to respond. Consider the specific quality of action that emerges from an aligned root. It is not frantic. It is not driven by the anxiety of a man who does not trust the process. It is not scattered across the multiple directions by the fear that any single path might fail. It is directed, purposeful, and calm. The action of a man who knows that his effort is moving with the current rather than against it, and who therefore does not need to compensate for the current's resistance with volume of effort. Alan would recognize this quality of action immediately. It is the action that naturally flows from a root of faith, measured, advancing, cumulative, building on itself with each successive act. It does not exhaust the man, it develops him. The connection between Wattles and Alan on this point is not merely complementary. It is mutually reinforcing in a way that makes each teaching more precise in the light of the other. Alan's principle tells you that the root determines everything. Wattles' science tells you exactly what a healthy root looks like and exactly how to cultivate it. Together, they form a complete teaching on the creation of wealth that leaves no role for the sacrifice doctrine. Not because sacrifice is forbidden, but because it is irrelevant. It addresses the wrong level of the system. It acts on the fruit while the root remains unchanged. It applies force where alignment is required. It offers pain where precision is demanded. And the law, operating with the same impersonal faithfulness it has always operated with, produces results that are proportional not to the pain expended, but to the quality of what was impressed upon the formless substance from the root. There is a quality of internal experience that Alan describes, a quality that Wattles would recognize as the outer signal of inner alignment, a sense of advancing, of growing, of becoming more rather than less with each act and each day. This is not the quality that the sacrifice model produces. The sacrifice model produces the experience of diminishment, of a man becoming less of himself over time, trading away his vitality in installments against a promised return that perpetually recedes. The aligned man, working from a cleared root, experiences the opposite. His effort fills him rather than depletes him. His work expresses his nature rather than eroding it. The results he produces are not extracted from a reluctant world. They are grown from an inner condition that the creative force of the universe is always, faithfully, prepared to meet. The practical implication of this alignment between Wattles and Alan is a complete reorganization of where a man invests his primary energy. The sacrifice model directs all energy outward. More hours, more effort, more renunciation, more grinding. The aligned model directs primary energy inward. The cultivation of thought, the maintenance of the vision, the governance of the dominant mental state, the practice of gratitude. This is not a smaller expenditure of energy. In many respects, it is a larger one, because the governance of the inner state is continuous and demands a vigilance that no schedule of external labor can match. But it is energy invested at the level of the cause, rather than the level of the effect. And investment at the level of cause is, by the law of the system, the only investment that changes the result. What Alan and Wattles together make impossible to ignore is the following. The man who has not yet governed his root and yet believes he can force his way to abundance through sacrifice is not merely inefficient. He is, in the precise meaning of the word, deluded, operating under a belief about the structure of reality that the law does not support and that the evidence of the world, examined with clear eyes, does not confirm. The hardest working people in the world are not the wealthiest. The most self-sacrificing people in the world are not the most abundant. This is not an injustice. It is the law operating correctly. Wealth flows through aligned channels. It does not flow to the most wounded. It does not respond to the depth of the sacrifice. It responds to the quality of the impression. This is the root principle. This is the law, and it was operative long before you were born. The final synthesis of these two teachings arrives at a single, precise directive that is simple to state and demanding to live. Before you act, govern your root. Before you expend effort, examine the quality of the inner state from which that effort will emerge. Ask not how much you are willing to sacrifice, but whether the impression you are placing upon the formless substance is the impression of faith and clarity and gratitude, or the impression of fear, doubt, and lack. The answer to that question is the answer to every practical question about the direction of your effort, the nature of your action, and the quality of the results that will grow from it. Allen named the law. Wattles named the practice. Together, they make the sacrifice doctrine not merely wrong, but obsolete. Wattles does not leave the error of competitive thinking as a vague cultural critique. He names it with clinical precision as the primary engine of unnecessary suffering in the pursuit of wealth. The foundational misbelief that drives the sacrifice model and makes its demands feel not merely reasonable, but inevitable. The man in competition believes, at the level of his most basic cosmological assumption, that the supply of wealth is finite. He believes that the abundance available in the world is a fixed quantity, a territory with borders, a table with a limited number of seats, and that whatever portion another man possesses is a portion unavailable to him. From this belief, every consequence of the competitive model follows with iron logic. If the supply is finite, then speed matters above all else. The man who moves faster, sleeps less, surrenders more, and endures longer will claim his portion before others can claim it first. Sacrifice becomes not merely virtuous, but rational, the necessary price of competitive advantage in a zero-sum arena. The man in competition does not sacrifice because he is foolish. He sacrifices because, given his foundational assumption about the nature of supply, sacrifice is the strategically correct response. He is not wrong in his logic. He is wrong in his premise. And the premise, once accepted without examination, produces a life of relentless, self-destroying effort oriented toward a goal that perpetually recedes. Because the competitive plane is structured, by definition, to produce winners and losers in roughly equal measure. The competitive plane is also, in a precise and important sense, self-reinforcing. The man in competition measures his position by comparison with others. His sense of advancement is not absolute. It is relative, defined by how far ahead of or behind his rivals he stands. This means that his inner state is never fully stable, never fully secure, never anchored in anything that does not shift with the movements of others. Even when he gains, he can lose the sense of gain the moment someone else gains more. His abundance is always contingent on another man's insufficiency. And this structural dependence on others' failure as the condition of his own success creates a persistent internal state of threat. The competitive man is always at war, and war, sustained without cease, requires sacrifice without limit. Wattles' correction operates at the level of cosmology, not strategy. He does not offer a better competitive approach. He dissolves the premise of competition entirely by replacing the finite supply model with a precise and demonstrable alternative. The formless substance is unlimited. This is not a spiritual comfort offered to soften the harshness of the competitive world. It is a statement of the operating principle of creation. The formless substance is not a fixed territory with borders. It is an inexhaustible creative intelligence that can produce from itself any form in response to the thought impressed upon it. When a man understands this, competition becomes not merely unnecessary, but incoherent. A strategy designed for a world that does not, at the foundational level, exist. What replaces competition is creation. The man who creates does not require another man's loss as the condition of his gain. He does not need to move faster than a rival, because the supply he is drawing from is not being depleted by another man's drawing from it. He does not need to work longer hours than his competitor, because the abundance he is producing is not taken from a limited pool that his competitor is also drawing from. He draws from the formless substance, which is inexhaustible, which cannot be depleted, which does not distinguish between one man's request and another's, and which responds with equal faithfulness to every clear impression placed upon it. The creative man's gain does not diminish any other man's access to the source. It is addition, not redistribution. This distinction, creation versus competition, is the precise point at which the zero-sacrifice model becomes not merely possible, but structurally inevitable. On the competitive plane, sacrifice is rational. On the creative plane, sacrifice is incoherent. On the creative plane, the only thing that matters is the quality of the impression placed upon the formless substance, the clarity of the vision, the faith with which it is held, the gratitude that keeps the channel open. None of these require sacrifice. None of them are produced by sacrifice. They are, in fact, undermined by the anxiety and self-destruction that the competitive model demands. The man who has shifted from the competitive to the creative plane has not merely adopted a more pleasant philosophy. He has changed the laws under which he operates. Here is the diagnostic test that separates the competitive man from the creative man. And it is not a test of external behavior. It is a test of the inner state that governs the behavior. The competitive man, in a moment of honest examination, will find that his dominant orientation is one of vigilance. A continuous scanning of the environment for threats, for rivals, for signs that the supply is being reduced. He is defending. He is protecting. He is calculating advantage. Even his moments of gain carry the shadow of potential loss. The creative man's dominant orientation is different in kind. He is moving toward the expression of a vision. His attention is not on rivals, but on the form he is building. His energy is not divided between advance and defense. It is wholly directed toward the creation of value, the addition of something to the world that was not there before. Value creation, in Wattles' system, is the precise means by which the creative man receives his abundance in return. He does not take from the world. He adds to it, through the exercise of his capacities, the expression of his vision, the production of goods or services or knowledge that represent a genuine addition of value to the lives of those who receive them, and the world, which is, at its foundational level, the formless substance organized into the forms of human activity and exchange, returns this addition multiplied. This is the law of increase that operates on the creative plane. It does not operate on the competitive plane, because the competitive man is not adding value. he is redistributing it, taking from one place to give to another, and calling the taking wealth. It is not wealth in Wattles' sense. It is a rearrangement of what already exists, and the law of increase does not reward rearrangement. The man who grasps this fully arrives at a realization of considerable force. Competitive thinking is not a strategy for winning a difficult game. It is the game itself. The game that the sacrifice doctrine was invented to serve. The entire architecture of sacrifice, the sleeplessness, the renunciation, the grinding, the willingness to destroy oneself for the goal, is built to support a man in competition, not a man in creation. On the creative plane, this architecture is not only unnecessary, but actively obstructive. The self-destruction of the sacrifice model interferes with the very inner conditions, clarity, faith, gratitude, that the creative law requires. The man who has adopted the creative plane and continues to practice the disciplines of the competitive plane is like a man who has found a clear road and continues to wade through the mud beside it out of long habit. Wattles draws the line between these two planes with a directness that allows no comfortable middle ground. You are either thinking creatively or thinking competitively. The impressions you are placing upon the formless substance are either impressions of abundance and expansion or impressions of scarcity and defense. The two cannot occupy the same mental space simultaneously, any more than clarity and confusion can coexist in a single thought. This is not a call for you to suppress your awareness of rivals or to pretend that competition does not exist in the material world. It is a call for something more demanding, to withdraw your primary attention and energy from the competitive frame entirely, and to orient your dominant thought toward the vision of what you are creating, rather than the threat of what you might lose. The liberation this produces is not comfortable in the way that ease is comfortable. It is the liberation of a man who has set down a burden he was never required to carry. The competitive man carries the weight of every rival, every market movement, every sign that the supply is diminishing. An aggregate burden that grows heavier as the field grows more crowded and the stakes grow higher. The creative man carries none of this. His burden is the single, specific weight of his vision, of maintaining the clarity of what he is creating, the faith that it is already in process, and the gratitude that keeps his relationship to the formless substance open and generative. This is demanding. But it is a demand made in the direction of life rather than in the direction of depletion. Zero sacrifice, zero competition, pure creation. This is not a slogan. It is the precise description of what becomes possible when a man understands the actual laws governing the creation of abundance. Wattles' entire system of wealth creation rests on a single practice that is not supplementary to the method. It is the method itself, the axis around which every other element of the teaching rotates. That practice is this: the formation of a clear mental image of the thing one intends to bring into being, held with absolute and unwavering faith, sustained without interruption by the conditions of circumstance or the doubts of evidence. Wattles is not describing a visualization exercise to be performed in the morning and set aside by noon. He is describing a permanent quality of mind, a governing orientation of thought that does not yield to the appearance of obstacles, does not diminish under the pressure of setbacks, and does not waver when the external world fails to immediately reflect the internal vision. The clarity of the mental image is not incidental to the practice. It is its primary condition. Wattles is precise on this point. A vague desire is not an impression upon the formless substance. It is noise, the man who wants more, without the specificity of what more looks like. without the precision of what he is building and toward what end, is not communicating with the creative intelligence of the universe. He is producing an undefined signal that the formless substance cannot render into form, because form requires definition. This is why Wattles instructs the man to build his mental image with the same precision an architect applies to a blueprint, not a sketch, but a fully developed vision of the thing as it will be, held so clearly and so consistently in the mind that it begins to acquire the quality of reality before it has yet acquired the quality of material existence. What is the active nature of this practice? This is a question Wattles anticipates, because the act of holding a mental image in faith does not, from the outside, resemble effort in any conventional sense. A man sitting in complete stillness, maintaining a clear and unwavering vision, might appear to the casual observer to be doing nothing, but Wattles argues, and the logic of his system supports the argument, that this is the most active thing a human being can do, because it is the direct act of impressing a specific form upon the thinking substance that underlies all material creation. Every moment that vision is held with genuine faith and genuine gratitude, the man is operating the mechanism by which the formless substance has always translated thought into form. He is not preparing to act on the law, he is already acting on it at the level where the law actually operates, which is the level of thought, not of labor. The demand for unwavering faith is where most men encounter the true difficulty of this practice, and it is important that the difficulty not be minimized. Wattles does not say, hold the vision until the first sign of adversity. He says, hold it absolutely, which means holding it when circumstances directly contradict it, when evidence appears that the vision is not materializing on schedule, when the people closest to the man express doubt, and when his own mind, habituated to competitive thinking and the anxiety of lack, generates its own internal opposition. This is not passive. This is a form of governance of the mind that requires the same order of sustained discipline that a soldier requires in holding a position under fire. The position is the vision. The fire is doubt. And doubt, in Wattles's cosmology, is not a natural and understandable response to difficulty. It is the specific thing that interrupts the channel between the man and the creative force he is working with. Why is faith, specifically, the quality that the formless substance requires? The answer lies in the nature of the substance itself. The formless substance is a creative force oriented toward expression and expansion. It responds to thought impressed upon it by moving in the direction of that thought. But doubt is not a neutral absence of faith. It is an impression of its own. The man who holds a vision and simultaneously doubts it is impressing two contradictory forms upon the formless substance: the form of the desired result and the form of its absence. The substance cannot simultaneously produce and withhold the same thing. The dominant impression governs, and in most men who operate without this understanding, the dominant impression is not the conscious, deliberate vision held in moments of focused practice. It is the habitual, background anxiety of the competitive man who does not genuinely believe abundance is available to him. The vision is held for 10 minutes in the morning. The doubt is held for 16 hours of waking life. Here is where the vision held without wavering becomes, in the fullest sense, a discipline of power rather than a discipline of comfort. The man who governs his mental state so that the vision is not merely his momentary aspiration, but his permanent dominant impression. That man has achieved something that the sacrifice model's most extreme practitioners never approach. He has brought his inner state into alignment with the creative law. He has made the primary broadcast of his existence a clear and unwavering impression of the form he intends to bring into being. And the formless substance, faithful to its own nature, is moved in that direction. Not occasionally, not when circumstances permit, constantly, because the law is always operative. And a constant, clear impression produces a constant, directed, creative response. The relationship between the vision and action is sequential but inseparable. Wattles does not instruct the man to hold the vision and wait passively for the result to materialize. He instructs the man to act, but to act in a specific way and from a specific inner condition. The action must be performed in the present, on the opportunity that is immediately available, with the full intensity of a man who is advancing toward his vision rather than retreating from a threat. And it must be performed without the anxiety that the result might not come. Because the man who has held his vision in genuine faith already knows that the result is in process. He is not hoping. He is allowing the already operative creative force to complete its work through the instrument of his action. This quality of action, purposeful, present, unhurried, advancing, is the behavioral expression of a man whose vision is truly held. It does not look like the frenetic effort of the competitive man because it does not need to compensate for the absence of alignment with volume of labor. It does not look like idleness because it is directed and sustained and building. It looks from the outside like the work of a man who knows something that others do not. A man moving with quiet authority in a direction that seems not to require the anguish that the surrounding culture insists is mandatory. And the reason it appears this way is precisely because it does not require that anguish. The anguish is the cost of misalignment. Remove the misalignment, and you remove its cost. The vision held without wavering is not finally a technique. It is a state of being, a condition in which the man's relationship to his own desired future has been transformed from one of hope and effort and sacrifice to one of certainty and expression and creation. The man who has arrived at this state does not need to be convinced to persist. He does not need to be motivated to act. He acts because he is expressing his nature. And the expression of nature requires no motivation. It requires only that the channel through which the nature is expressed remain open and unobstructed. Keep the vision clear. Keep the faith unwavering. Keep the gratitude genuine. These are not steps in a protocol. They are the inner conditions of a man who has stopped sacrificing and started creating. What does the practical life of this man look like in its daily texture? He does not begin his day with anxiety about whether the work will yield. He begins with the vision, not as a ritual performance, but as the natural first orientation of a mind that has been trained to its proper function. He acts through the day, not with the urgency of a man racing against a clock that is counting down his remaining opportunities, but with the steadiness of a man who understands that each present action is the correct action when it is performed from the right inner condition. He ends his day not with the hollow exhaustion of a man who has paid a toll, but with the particular quality of fatigue that is the physical residue of genuine expression, the kind that restores itself in sleep rather than accumulating as debt. This is the vision of the man who has understood Wattles at the level of principle rather than the level of technique. He has not found a more efficient sacrifice. He has not optimized his suffering. He has eliminated the source of the suffering at the root by replacing the impression of fear and lack with the clear, unwavering, faith-held vision that the formless substance has always been waiting to receive. And having replaced it, he discovers what the sacrifice model, in all its generations of practice, has never been able to produce. Not merely better results, but a different quality of life. A life in which the work and the living are no longer in opposition, but are the same thing, expressed through the same aligned and unobstructed channel. What remains, when the vision is clearly held and faith is genuinely present, is the recognition that you were never required to break yourself for what you wanted. The universe did not demand that price. The culture demanded it, having forgotten the law. The men who taught sacrifice taught it because they had forgotten or never learned the nature of the substance they were working with. They were sincerely mistaken, and their sincerity made their error authoritative. But the error does not become truth through authority. The law remains what it is. The formless substance responds to the quality of the impression, and the quality of the impression is determined not by the volume of your sacrifice, but by the clarity of your vision and the unwavering constancy of the faith with which you hold it. There is a devastating irony at the center of the sacrifice model that Wattles' teaching brings into sharp relief. An irony that, once seen, cannot be unseen, because it reveals the sacrifice doctrine to be not merely ineffective, but actively self-defeating in the precise domain where its practitioners believe they are making the greatest progress. The man who sacrifices most, who grinds beyond the capacity of his body and mind, who surrenders his ease and his relationships and his health in the name of his goal, is not simply paying a high price for a worthy result. He is broadcasting, through every act of self-destruction, the signal that most completely contradicts what the law of creation requires. Suffering, in Wattles' system, is not the currency of success. It is the evidence of doubt. This requires elaboration, because the logic is precise, and its full weight must be carried. When a man exhausts himself in the service of his goal beyond any reasonable degree of directed effort, what is he actually expressing? On the surface, he is expressing commitment, but at the level of the inner state that governs his action, at the level that the formless substance reads, rather than the level at which the culture applauds, he is expressing something very different. He is expressing the belief that his effort alone must carry what his faith should carry. He is expressing, in the language of action, the conviction that the process cannot be trusted, that without his constant, brutal, unrelenting force, the result will not come. This is doubt, rendered physical. And the formless substance, which responds to the totality of the impression rather than the intention behind it, receives this as the dominant signal. The word signal is important here. Wattles' teaching operates on the premise that the formless substance is always reading what is being impressed upon it, not what the man intends to impress, not what he is consciously attempting to communicate, but what his total inner state is broadcasting moment by moment. A man who holds a vision in the morning and then spends the rest of his day in a state of anxious overwork and desperate self-sacrifice is not successfully impressing the vision upon the formless substance, and also paying the price for it. He is impressing the anxiety upon the formless substance. The anxiety is the dominant broadcast, and the creative intelligence of the universe, faithful to its own nature, produces the equivalent of the dominant broadcast, which is not the vision, but the fear. This is the mechanism by which the sacrifice model perpetuates itself with such tenacity across generations. The man sacrifices. The result does not come in the form he expects. He concludes, with the logic available to him, that he has not sacrificed enough, that the price was not yet fully paid, that he must give more, he sacrifices more. The anxiety deepens because more sacrifice without result is a more desperate signal of doubt. The formless substance returns more of what the dominant impression is broadcasting. The result recedes further. The man interprets this as evidence that the universe truly is hard, that wealth truly does require suffering, and that only the most extreme sacrifice will ultimately succeed. He is trapped in a feedback loop whose very mechanism is invisible to him because he does not know the law. What Wattles is naming here is not mere psychological stress or the physiological consequences of overwork, though both are real and both are relevant. He is naming a metaphysical error of the first order, the confusion between the appearance of effort and the nature of creative alignment. The man who sacrifices has mistaken the outer form of seriousness for the inner condition of faith. He believes that the universe reads effort the way a creditor reads a deposit, that enough effort, accumulated with enough consistency, will eventually constitute a sufficient payment. But the formless substance is not a creditor. It is a creative intelligence. It does not read the quantity of your sacrifice. It reads the quality of your inner state, and a man in chronic anxiety and self-destruction is in an inner state of fear, regardless of how impressive the outer evidence of his effort appears to the cultural audience. The elimination of sacrifice, understood in this light, is not an invitation to reduce effort. It is a demand for something more profound and more difficult. The elimination of the fear that the sacrifice was disguising. The sacrifice was never the cause of such results as the sacrificing man produced. It was the cost of the misalignment, born without understanding what it was costing or why. To eliminate sacrifice without eliminating the fear that drove it is merely to become idle. But to eliminate the fear, to replace it with genuine, unwavering faith in the creative intelligence that is always operative and always responsive to the right impression, is to remove the specific obstruction that was interfering with the channel. What remains once the obstruction is removed is not less effort. It is directed effort, purposeful effort, advancing effort, conducted from a state of inner certainty that does not require the anesthesia of constant grinding to suppress the doubt. The effortless way in this context is not a description of ease in the shallow sense. It is a description of what happens when friction is removed. A river does not struggle to flow. It flows because flowing is its nature, and the channel is open. Introduce an obstruction and the river struggles. Not because its nature has changed, but because the channel is blocked. Remove the obstruction and the nature reasserts itself without effort. The man who has removed the inner obstruction, the fear, the doubt, the anxiety, the desperate self-sacrifice that was broadcasting lack to the formless substance, does not need to push. He is already in a natural current. He flows in the direction of his vision because that is the direction of his nature. And because the channel between him and the creative intelligence of the universe is no longer filled with the noise of his own self-defeat. There is a specific quality of inner state that Wattles identifies as the opposite of the sacrifice trap. A quality that is both the means and the evidence of alignment. It is a state of confident expectation, not hope, which carries the shadow of its own failure, not desire, which acknowledges the absence of the desired thing. Confident expectation, the settled inner knowing that the thing being created is in process, that the law is operative, that the formless substance has received the impression and is already moving in the direction of its manifestation. A man in confident expectation does not grind himself to dust because he does not need to compensate for doubt with labor. He acts steadily and purposefully because his action is the final, physical expression of a creative process that was already in motion before he lifted a hand. This inner state, confident expectation, combined with genuine gratitude and clear vision, is the antidote to the sacrifice trap. It is not a comfortable state in the sense of requiring no discipline. It is the most demanding inner discipline that Wattles describes, because it must be maintained against the full weight of a culture that insists on sacrifice, against the visible evidence of conditions that may not yet reflect the vision, and against the inner habits of competitive, lack-oriented thought that have been accumulated over a lifetime of unconscious immersion in the sacrifice doctrine. But it is demanding in the right direction. It is the discipline of a man governing his root, not punishing his branches. And as the root is governed, what grows from it requires progressively less force to maintain, because it is the natural expression of an aligned inner state rather than the forced extraction of results from a resistant world. The man who understands the fatal sacrifice trap fully understands that every act of self-destruction he performs in the name of his goal is a vote of no confidence in the law. It is a physical statement, broadcast to the formless substance in the language the formless substance actually reads, saying, "I do not believe the creative intelligence will provide. I do not trust the process. I must compensate with suffering." And the formless substance, with perfect and impersonal faithfulness, returns the equivalent of that statement in the form of his outer experience, not as punishment, as the law. The universe does not punish the man who doubts. It confirms him. It gives him precisely the experience that his dominant impression has requested. And if his dominant impression is fear dressed as sacrifice, it gives him an outer life that confirms that fear with meticulous and devastating accuracy. The correction is available at any moment because the law is always fully operative. The man who recognizes the trap does not need to atone for the years spent in it. He does not need to work twice as hard to make up for lost time. He needs only to change the quality of the impression he is placing upon the formless substance. To replace the broadcast of anxious, self-defeating doubt with the broadcast of clear vision, genuine faith, and real gratitude. The moment he does this, the law begins to respond to the new impression with the same faithfulness it always had. Not gradually, not eventually. Now, because the law has no memory of past impressions. It responds only to what is being impressed upon it in the present. This is both the most precise and the most liberating truth in the entire system. The channel can be cleared, and the clearing takes effect immediately. Among the mechanics of Wattles' system, gratitude occupies a position that most readers, accustomed to thinking of thankfulness as a pleasant sentiment or a moral virtue, are not initially prepared to receive at its actual weight. Wattles does not introduce gratitude as a quality of character to be cultivated for its own sake, nor as a psychological technique for improving one's emotional state, nor as a spiritual practice appropriate to religious observance. He introduces it as a mechanical force, a specific and identifiable function within the operating system of creation. And he devotes to its treatment an attention that signals its centrality to the entire method. Without gratitude, the system does not function. This is not a moral claim. It is a structural one. The mechanism by which gratitude functions in Wattles' system is rooted in the nature of the formless substance itself. The formless substance, as established in the foundation of his teaching, responds to the quality of the impression placed upon it. A mind held in gratitude is a mind oriented toward abundance, toward the recognition of what is already present, what is already given, what already constitutes an expression of the creative intelligence of the universe in the man's life. A mind held in resentment is a mind oriented toward lack, toward the recognition of what is absent, what is withheld, what the world has failed to provide. These are not merely different emotional colorings of the same inner state. They are different impressions upon the formless substance. And the formless substance responds to each with the same faithful precision it applies to every impression it receives. Gratitude, in functional terms, keeps the channel between the man and the formless substance open. This is Wattles's precise claim, and it merits examination at the level of principle rather than the level of feeling. A channel is open when what flows through it is not obstructed. The primary obstructions to the creative channel are the impressions of lack, fear, resentment, and doubt, all of which are broadcasts oriented away from the nature of the formless substance, which is creative, expansive, and oriented toward more life. Gratitude is the inner orientation that is most naturally aligned with the nature of the formless substance, because it is, at its core, the recognition of abundance, the acknowledgement that the creative intelligence of the universe is already operating, already expressing, already providing. A man who is genuinely grateful is already, in the most important sense, in a state of abundance. The channel is open. The law can function. It is important to understand the precision of Wattles's claim about gratitude in relation to circumstance. He does not instruct the man to be grateful for what he wants to have, as if gratitude could substitute for acquisition. He instructs the man to be grateful for what he already has, for the present expressions of abundance, however modest, that already constitute the creative intelligence of the universe at work in his life. This distinction is critical. The man who practices gratitude only in imagination, directed toward a future that has not yet arrived, is not in a state of gratitude. He is in a state of wanting, colored with a polite inflection. Genuine gratitude is rooted in the present, in the recognition that the abundance already present, even in its smallest forms, is the evidence of the same creative law that will produce the larger vision. It is gratitude for the law itself, expressed through what the law has already produced. A man who is genuinely grateful for what he already has is simultaneously, in the same act, in a state of abundance, regardless of what his material circumstances reflect. This is not self-deception. It is a precise inner orientation that accurately recognizes the presence of the creative law, even when its full expression is not yet visible. The man with modest circumstances and genuine gratitude is, from the perspective of Wattles's system, in a more powerful creative state than the man with greater material wealth and chronic resentment, because the former is broadcasting abundance to the formless substance, and the latter is broadcasting lack. And the formless substance, with its characteristic and impersonal faithfulness, is producing results proportional to each broadcast. The inverse of gratitude, resentment, deserves its own precise examination, because it is, in the modern world, among the most widely cultivated inner states and among the most destructive to the creative channel. The resentful man experiences the abundance of others as evidence of his own deprivation. He interprets the success of those around him as a redistribution of wealth that came at his expense, which is the precise inner logic of the competitive model, rendering itself in an emotional form. This resentment impresses upon the formless substance a clear and consistent signal of lack, of injustice, of a universe that distributes unequally and provides insufficiently. The formless substance, reading this signal, produces the corresponding outer experience. The resentful man finds himself in a world that consistently confirms his resentment by providing him with new occasions for it. This is not the universe being cruel. This is the law being accurate. Gratitude dissolves resentment not because gratitude is a more pleasant emotion, but because gratitude and resentment are mutually exclusive orientations toward the same material. They cannot occupy the same inner space simultaneously. The man who has cultivated genuine gratitude for the abundance already present in his life cannot, in the same moment, resent the abundance present in the life of another. He can recognize the other man's abundance as evidence of the same creative law operating through a different channel, as further confirmation that the law is operative, that the formless substance is responsive, and that the channel through which he is now deliberately working is capable of producing the same quality of result. The other man's abundance becomes, for the grateful man, an encouragement. For the resentful man, it is a wound. The cost of gratitude is an important consideration, and Wattles addresses it implicitly by the way he frames the practice. Gratitude, unlike labor, requires no physical sacrifice. It demands nothing external. It cannot be purchased or outsourced or produced by any amount of grinding effort. It is available to the man with nothing and the man with great plenty in equal measure, at every moment of every day, at zero cost in the currency of the sacrifice model. This is not a trivial observation. It means that gratitude, the highest leverage tool in the entire system, the practice that keeps the creative channel open and the formless substance in receipt of the right impression, is the most accessible practice available to any human being in any condition. It is also among the most demanding, because it requires the governance of the inner state at a level of consistency that most men never apply to anything other than their external obligations. Consider the compounding nature of genuine gratitude over time. A man who maintains a consistent inner state of gratitude is, day by day, building the habit of recognizing abundance. This habit, once established, begins to change what the man actually sees in his experience. Not because the experience changes first, but because the orientation of perception changes the quality of what perception receives. The grateful man begins to notice opportunities, connections, and resources that were always present but invisible to the resentful or fearful mind. This is not a mystical observation. It is a description of how attentional orientation shapes what is perceived as relevant and actionable within a given environment. The man oriented toward abundance perceives an abundant world. The man oriented toward lack perceives a world of insufficiency. Both are looking at the same world. Both are seeing something genuinely different. Gratitude also has a specific relationship to the experience of receiving, to the moment when the creative process that was set in motion by clear vision, faith, and aligned action produces its material result. The man without gratitude, even when abundance arrives, receives it in a compromised state. He is already looking toward what is not yet present, already measuring the gap between what has arrived and what he still wants, already in the posture of lack that he was in before the arrival. The grateful man receives differently. He receives with a recognition that deepens his experience of abundance, which deepens the quality of the impression he places upon the formless substance, which accelerates and expands the creative process further. Gratitude is not merely a condition for receiving. It is the inner state that makes the receiving generative rather than terminal. Each reception becomes the foundation of the next creation. Wattles' emphasis on gratitude is, in retrospect, one of the most radical elements of his teaching. Radical not because gratitude is a novel concept, but because the function he assigns it is so precisely mechanical. He is not saying that a grateful man deserves more. He is saying that a grateful man is in a fundamentally different relationship to the formless substance than a resentful one. That the channel through which the creative intelligence of the universe expresses abundance is, for the grateful man, structurally open in a way it cannot be for the resentful man, regardless of the resentful man's effort, intelligence, or ambition. Gratitude is not a virtue layered on top of the system. It is a structural component of the system. Remove it, and the system cannot function, because the channel through which creation flows is blocked at its source. There is, finally, a quality of experience that the practice of genuine gratitude produces that Wattles does not name explicitly, but that is present as the subtext of everything he writes about it. It is the experience of being in right relationship with the universe, of recognizing oneself as the recipient and expression of a creative intelligence that is not hostile, not indifferent, not demanding sacrifice, but actively and faithfully oriented toward more life through every channel it finds open to receive it. This experience is not a luxury reserved for those who have already achieved their vision. It is available at the beginning of the practice, in the act of genuine recognition of what already is. And it is, in a very precise sense, the inner experience of a man who has already stepped off the altar of sacrifice, a man who has understood that the universe was never asking for his sufferings, and who has begun, at last, to give it what it was always waiting for: a clear channel, a faithful mind, and a grateful heart. The man who has understood gratitude at this level does not practice it as a technique to be performed. He lives it as a permanent orientation, as the default quality of his relationship to the creative intelligence that he is, at the foundational level, made of. And from this orientation, every other element of Wattles' system finds its proper place and its proper function. The vision is held more easily because it is held from a foundation of existing abundance, rather than from the desperate reaching of lack. The faith is more stable because it is grounded in gratitude for the law's past operation rather than suspended in hope of its future performance. The action is more directed because it is performed by a man who is not defending against loss, but expressing toward creation. Gratitude is not the final ingredient. It is the ground in which all the other ingredients can take root and grow. Wattles describes, with a specificity that distinguishes his teaching from vague spiritual optimism, the particular quality of experience that signals a man's alignment with the formless substance. It is not a feeling of happiness, which is too easily confused with circumstantial comfort. It is not the feeling of certainty, which can be manufactured by willpower without reflecting genuine alignment. It is a quality that Wattles captures in the language of advancing life. The specific inner experience of a man who is growing, expressing, adding to the world, and receiving back in proportion to what he has added. The man on this path does not merely feel well. He feels like more of himself than he was yesterday. And this progressive increase in the sense of self, not in ego, but in the expression of genuine capacity, is the inner signal that the creative channel is open and the law is operative. How does this quality of experience differ from the inner experience of the sacrifice model? The distinction is not one of comfort versus discomfort, because the advancing man works hard and the quality of his advancing is not the quality of ease. The distinction is one of direction. The sacrifice model produces an inner experience of diminishment over time, a progressive hollowing out of the self as its resources are extracted in payment of a debt that never seems to be fully settled. The man on the advancing path experiences the opposite direction, an inner expansion. Each act adds to him rather than subtracting from him. Each day leaves him with more capacity, more clarity, more depth than the day before. The work is demanding, but it is the demand of growth, not the demand of extraction. What does this look like in the texture of daily experience? It is observable in the relationship between action and energy. The man aligned with the formless substance works, often with great intensity, but returns the next day with energy that has been replenished rather than consumed, because the work was an expression of his nature rather than a contradiction of it. His decisions arise from clarity rather than from the compulsion of fear. His relationships are characterized by the quality of a man who is full, who has something to give, rather than the quality of a man who is empty and seeking replenishment from those around him. The momentum of his work builds visibly. Each action creates conditions that make the next action more powerful, more effective, more aligned with the direction of the vision. This is not strategic planning, though it can resemble it. It is the formless substance expressing itself through a cleared channel, building the material expression of the vision with each successive act of aligned effort. Results arrive in the life of the aligned man in ways that are often impossible to attribute to any single planned action. Wattles describes this phenomenon with a precision that distinguishes it from luck. The formless substance, impressed with the clear vision of the man's intended creation, moves through every channel available to it in the world of form. Through people, through circumstances, through information arriving at precisely the right moment, to produce the conditions that allow the vision to materialize. The man who knows this law recognizes these convergences not as fortunate accidents, but as the predictable operation of the creative intelligence he has aligned himself with. He is not surprised by them, he expected them, and his expectation, rooted in genuine faith rather than wishful thinking, was itself part of the impression that set them in motion. The advancing man's relationship to setback is also characteristically different from the sacrifice models. The sacrifice model produces a fragile relationship to adversity. The man who is already depleted by the cost of his grinding has no reserve from which to absorb further difficulty, and setbacks strike at the most vulnerable point, the point of already exhausted faith. For the man aligned with the formless substance, setback is read through a different lens. It is not evidence that the law has failed. It is information, feedback about some aspect of the approach that requires adjustment, or a rerouting of the creative force through a different material channel than the one the man had anticipated. The aligned man adjusts without panic because his faith is not in the particular path, but in the law that operates through all paths. The vision is unchanged. The faith is unchanged. Only the specific channel of action requires modification. This adaptability is not resilience in the sense of suffering without complaint. It is the natural flexibility of a man whose inner foundation is stable. This stability, the inner certainty of a man who has aligned with the creative law and knows that the law is always operative, is the final and perhaps the most powerful signal of the effortless way. It does not announce itself loudly. It is not the aggressive confidence of a man performing conviction for an audience. It is quieter than that and heavier. It is the specific gravity of a man who has ceased to be at war, who has set down the competitive weapons, dismantled the altar of sacrifice, and taken his position in the current of a creative force that was never hostile, never reluctant, and never waiting for him to bleed before it would move in his direction. He has arrived at what Wattles' entire teaching was pointing toward. Not the summit reached, but the climb rightly understood. Zero sacrifice, maximum creation. And the formless substance, as it has always been, already in motion. What Wattles' teaching ultimately performs, when it is understood at the level of principle rather than the level of technique, is a complete dissolution of the sacrifice doctrine, from the inside out. He does not argue against sacrifice on humanitarian grounds. He does not say that you deserve to suffer less, or that the universe wishes your happiness as a matter of cosmic generosity. He does something more devastating to the doctrine. He demonstrates that sacrifice, as a creative strategy, is structurally incapable of producing what it promises. It is not merely painful. It is incorrect. It applies force at the wrong level, in the wrong direction, against the wrong resistance. And its most dedicated practitioners are precisely those most likely to find that the result they bled for remains, after all the bleeding, still beyond reach. The man who has aligned his thought with the creative intelligence of the formless substance, who has cultivated the clear vision, the unwavering faith, and the genuine gratitude that Wattles identifies as the three conditions of the creative channel, does not sacrifice. He expresses, and this is the precise distinction that changes everything. The difference between expression and sacrifice is the difference between a man acting from fullness and a man acting from depletion. Expression adds to the man who performs it, because it is the outward movement of what is already present within him, his capacity, his vision, his nature aligned with the creative force of the universe. Sacrifice subtracts from the man who performs it, because it is the extraction of what is present in exchange for a return that the law, operating correctly, was never going to provide through that channel. Expression, in Wattles' deepest sense, is effortless by nature. Not in the sense that it requires no exertion, but in the sense that it requires no struggle against itself. A river does not struggle to express water. A tree does not struggle to express leaf and fruit. These are not achievements extracted from reluctant organisms. They are the natural consequences of a form expressing its own nature through a clear and open channel. The man who has aligned his inner state with the creative impulse of the formless substance is in the same relationship to his work. The work flows from him as an expression of what he is, not as a payment for what he wants to become. And what flows from alignment does not hollow its source. It develops it. This synthesis carries an implication for how the entire architecture of ambition must be rethought. The cultural model of ambition is, at its root, a model of self-overcoming through suffering. The idea that the man you want to be stands on the far side of the sacrifice of the man you currently are. Wattles inverts this structure entirely. The man you want to be is not the product of the destruction of the man you are. He is the expression of the man you are when your inner state is aligned with the creative law. You do not sacrifice your way forward. You align your way forward. And alignment is not self-destruction. It is self-recognition. The recognition of the creative intelligence within you as the same intelligence that underlies all form, all abundance, and all genuine creation in the universe. The synthesis is, in the end, a single law stated with the precision of a first principle. Sacrifice is the symptom of misalignment, and misalignment is the only real obstacle between any man and the fullness of life he is designed to express. Remove the misalignment through the governance of thought, the maintenance of the vision, the practice of genuine gratitude, and the abandonment of competitive thinking for the creative plane. And what remains is not a man who has achieved his goal through the application of superior sacrifice. What remains is a man who has grown into his goal, naturally and inevitably, because he has placed himself in right relationship with the force that was always moving in that direction. The effort is real. The struggle is gone. This is the effortless way. Wallace Wattles devoted the final years of his life to a single, precise, and consuming conviction that poverty is not the will of the universe, and that the suffering of men who have not yet found abundance is not the tribute that creation demands before it opens. He wrote not as a theorist spinning ideas from comfort, but as a man who had himself inhabited the condition of lack for most of his life, and who had, through sustained and rigorous application of the principles he would come to teach, arrived at a fundamentally different relationship to the nature of wealth and creation. He was not a wealthy man in the conventional sense, but he was a man who had found the law and had the precision of mind to describe it with enough clarity that anyone willing to examine it honestly could test it for themselves. The truth that Wattles carried, the truth that he spent his productive years trying to deliver to whoever had the capacity to receive it, was not the truth of optimism. It was not the truth of positive thinking in the diluted modern sense of that term. It was the truth of a law, that the formless substance of which all things are made is a thinking substance, that thought impressed upon this substance produces the form of the thought, and that a man who knows this law and operates according to it is not hoping for abundance. He is producing it through the precise operation of the mechanism by which all things have ever been produced. This is not a vision of a kinder universe. It is a vision of a lawful one. The formulation Wattles provides, that a man can impress his thought upon formless substance and cause the thing he thinks about to be created, is the most direct and unadorned statement of the creative law available in the literature of mind. It does not ask for belief as a prerequisite. It asks for application. It does not promise a specific timeline or a particular configuration of result. It promises the operation of a law, which is more reliable than any promise and more demanding than any creed. A law does not occasionally operate. It does not operate when the conditions are favorable. It does not take account of the worthiness or unworthiness of the man who stands before it. It operates always in the direction of what is impressed upon it. The man who knows this is not empowered. He is precise. And precision, in the domain of creation, is worth more than any quantity of uninformed effort. The creative vision that Wattles describes, the mental image of the thing to be brought into being, held in faith and gratitude, is the act by which the human mind participates most fully in the creative intelligence of the universe. This is what you were designed to do, not to sacrifice, not to compete, not to extract abundance from a reluctant world through the payment of personal destruction. You were designed to think with precision, with faith, with the clarity of a mind that has recognized its own nature as an expression of the same formless substance from which all things are made. You were designed to form things in thought and to impress those thoughts upon the substance that created suns and galaxies from the same inexhaustible intelligence. The smallness that the sacrifice doctrine assigned to you, the smallness of a man who must bleed for every increment of progress, is not your nature. It is a misunderstanding of your nature, held in place by a culture that forgot the law. The master's truth, in its most concentrated form, is this: you are not outside the source of abundance, petitioning for entry. You are made of the source. Your thought is the medium through which the source creates. Your vision is the form toward which the source moves, and your gratitude is the open channel through which the source flows without obstruction. This is not a comfort offered to the discouraged. It is a cosmological fact stated with the authority of a man who tested it until he was certain of its reliability. It is the foundation of a way of living that requires nothing to be sacrificed. Because sacrifice was always the cost of misunderstanding the law, not the price of operating it correctly. What Wattles asks of the man who has understood this truth is not a transformation of personality or an abandonment of ambition. He asks only for a single, profound reorientation. From the competitive plane to the creative. From the impression of lack to the impression of abundance. From the broadcast of fear to the broadcast of faith. From the altar of sacrifice to the field of expression. This reorientation does not happen once and become permanent through the act of deciding. It requires daily, hourly governance of the inner state, the same discipline that any genuine mastery requires, applied to the domain where all results ultimately originate. The quality of the thought that the man brings to the formless substance, that is always, without exception, listening. The legacy that Wallace Wattles left is not a self-improvement system. It is a correction to a fundamental error in the cosmology of human striving. An error so pervasive and so ancient that it has become invisible, absorbed into the assumption structure of entire civilizations, as though it were a natural law rather than a misunderstanding of one. His correction is available to any man at any moment. Regardless of circumstance, regardless of how many years have been spent in the sacrifice model, and regardless of how deeply the altar has been built. The law was operative before you arrived. It will be operative when you are gone. The only question it places before you is the question it has always placed before every man who has stood in its presence. What are you impressing upon the substance that creates all things? What is the quality of the thought you are bringing to the intelligence that will render it, without fail, into the form of your life? You have reached the end of an examination that was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to correct you. With the precision and the restraint that truth demands, when it is delivered to a mind that is finally prepared to receive it. What has been laid before you is not a philosophy of ease. It is a science of alignment. And alignment demands more of a man than sacrifice ever did, because sacrifice required only that you break yourself, while alignment requires that you govern yourself, which is an infinitely more demanding task. Wallace Wattles saw, with the clarity of a man who had lived the alternative, that the sacrifice model was not the path to abundance. It was the longest possible detour around the law that produces abundance. A detour made expensive by the very sincerity of those who took it, who suffered so authentically that the suffering appeared to be evidence of the path's validity. It was not. Suffering is the diagnostic signal of misalignment. It is the body and the mind registering, in the most direct language available to them, that what is being done is not in the direction of life. When you encounter it as a sustained condition of your striving, it is not asking you to endure more. It is asking you to examine the root. The principle that makes sacrifice obsolete is not a principle of relaxation. It is a principle of law. The formless substance responds to the quality of the impression: clear vision, unwavering faith, genuine gratitude, and advancing action. These are the four conditions that open the creative channel. They are available to you now. They were available before you found this teaching, because the law was always operative. The only thing that was absent was your knowledge of what it required. You have that knowledge. What you do with it is the only variable that remains. There is a question that this teaching places before you. not as an invitation, but as a demand of honesty. When you examine the totality of the impressions you are broadcasting to the formless substance, not in your deliberate moments, but in the aggregate of your waking hours, what quality of signal do you find? Is the dominant broadcast the clear vision held in faith? Or is it the anxious, self-defeating noise of a man still standing at the altar, still paying the price of a debt the universe never issued? This is not a comfortable question. It is not meant to be. It is the question that separates the man who has understood this teaching from the man who has merely heard it. Write in the comments the 2 words that mark your entry onto the creative plane: zero sacrifice. Not as an affirmation, not as a declaration of what you wish were true, as a statement of the principle you have understood, the principle that you are prepared to apply with the precision and the consistency that the law requires. Let it be your public commitment to the reorientation from the competitive plane to the creative, from the altar of sacrifice to the field of expression, from the broadcast of fear to the broadcast of faith. The formless substance is not impressed by declarations, but you are. And the man who has stated his understanding publicly has begun the work of making that understanding structural rather than temporary. If you are prepared to go deeper, to examine further the teachings of the masters who understood the laws that govern the creation of wealth, health, and dominion, then remain within this archive. There is more. There has always been more. The masters left nothing incomplete. What they left was a body of knowledge waiting for the man precise enough and patient enough to receive it in full. That man is either you or he is not. The law will tell you which.